So if this is your first time in the room, welcome to the White Owl Room, where we are talking about all things retail for the remainder of the day. And this next presentation I am really excited about. We're going to have lots of fun because we are talking about Rockin, the in-store experience. And when we're thinking about what that means, I think we really have to put it in context of what's going on with consumers and how do we as retailers and brands interface with them, because there's so much information on creating custom experiences for consumers these days, but so much of that is through the lens of CDPs and other marketing tools. But as Kevin will probably allude to, one of the best ways to engage with consumers is when they're in store at either your retail or your brand and you're able to make that personal connection with them. So we're going to talk about what that means in the future and how we can really create better brand awareness for consumers and really create those bonds between consumers and the retailers and brands that service them. And with that, I will pass it over to Kevin Ching, who is our SVP of Retail, Restaurant, and Advertising here at Placer. Take it away, Kevin.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome. All right, I'll do that with this. Rockin' the store experience. Love your store. Maybe as much as your app. I don't know if it has to be more, but a lot. One thing I'll ask you guys to do is this. We're going to try to make this interactive. So there's going to be 2 QR codes put out. So we're going to flash them up. So have your phones ready if you want to participate. It's obviously optional. And then that'll just take a pulse of the room, and then I will, sort of talk about it at the end. But so 2 QR codes will come, we'll flash them up for a while, vote, and then we'll bring it back. Okay, so what is this session about, right? There's 2 other great sessions hosted by Placer, and this is the one you want to be in, right? This is the good one, okay. So you know that you are in the right room if you not only work on creating products or creating menus or creating experiences, right? You're part of that creation and you want to get that out. But you're in the right room if you're the person who really obsesses about how your consumers react to the products that you have, right? You put in a lot of effort to design that product, get the right materials, innovate new and match that right color. And so, this is the room for when consumers come into your store, you really want them to experience all the things that you've put out there. So, maybe some examples of who might be in the room, right? You might be in real estate and you're driving along. Maybe you've got your family or your friends and you're going, to relatives for the holidays, or maybe you're going to a rock concert or something, and then you've opened a store in this town that's not even where you're supposed to be, and you're driving along and you're like, we gotta stop 5 minutes, please, come on, and you pull over and you're like, guys, look at this parking lot. There's so much parking. This is a great location, right? That might be who's in here. Or if you are in maybe strategy or operations or merchandising, you can't help just peeking back into your stores. You want to see, people touching your clothes. You want to see how they look on the shelves. You want to see how people are experiencing your new innovations. You're like, check out those pants. My new winter lineup. They got fleece lining in there. Come on, right? So that's who is hopefully here. And so as I look out, I hope we have a bunch of people from all different types of departments, right? I hope we have real estate. We have operations, finance, strategy. And merchandising and marketing, right? Because what we all know is that getting that consumer experience, connecting to the consumers, it's more than just one department, right? So today we're going to be talking about how to personalize these experiences for the stores, but more importantly, what data can we use to help you on that journey, okay? So my name's Kevin Ching. I run the vertical lead for retail, restaurant, and advertising. My background has primarily been in digital and CRM, ad tech, martech, right? That's where I've been. When I used to think about personalization, it used to look like that. You had a consumer, right? And then you would have all this technology to go out there and catch all these digital touch points and get all this information about it, right? So you spend a lot of money on getting that. And then you'd have to get an identity graph because, somebody on their TV, on their phone, on their laptop to the metaverse and Decentraland, Those are all different identifiers. You have to get an identity graph and bring it in. And so now you have to, pay for cloud and compute and all those types of things. And then now that you have all this data, you have to make it actionable. So then you have to bring in AI and ML to get that next best action. And just as a reminder, this is how I used to think about things. This is Placer, so we're much more aggregated and privacy friendly now, right? But you would bring all that data in, and then guess what? In order to actually get that next best action out, you'd have to buy a CDP. And so that's just yet another cost, and you have to do it so you can get that all that data out there. And then, when Kevin shows up on CNN, voila, you've got that perfect, ad, right? Maybe you're putting out gazelles, Adidas gazelles, because that's what's trending, right? So that's how that used to be. And, I was really proud to work on those types of things. But the thing I realized is that is a very complicated and it is a very expensive solution, right? So, one of the reasons I came to Placer is that there has to be sort of a better way of sort of, doing the trade desk thing where you're making this access, you're making this personalization more accessible to more companies, right? And so, when I look at it, all that money that's being spent, I kind of have to ask my question, why? 85% of sales, right? This is eMarketer and this is Capital One, pretty reputable Capital One, especially the credit cards, they can tell where you're buying, happened in store, okay? So I started asking why. I know retailers don't want to spend money foolishly, like they don't want to spend this money that's that's not put to you good use. There's a lot of time that the industry would have had to work on this, and so how do people make decisions? Should I invest in my app? Should I upgrade my app? Should I buy this CDP, or should I remodel my 3 bottom performing stores? Maybe there's just not good data that allows that to happen, right? And I think, if Placer, if companies like us and other, companies that focus more on store spent more time and money on solutions, then maybe we can sort of balance that out and we can make these stores much more growth engines in the same way that digital, because digital has this, one-to-one, right? I know Kevin Ching saw an ad, and I know Kevin Ching then bought a Coke, because I'm on the Walmart network, but maybe that one-to-one doesn't exist here, so how do we make the data better? And so that's the premise and the subject of today, right? I mean, if we are all used to our audience segments, we are all used to, these are my most loyal customers. These are my customers with my highest long-term value. Here are the customers who haven't shopped with me or even opened an email in the last 30 days. Oh no, heaven forbid. That's how we're used to creating audience segments, but how can we create those same kind of segments and do it at the store level, okay? And so later on, I'm gonna be talking about the ways that Placer is going to be thinking about creating these type of store segments that can be used in order to drive that ROI, drive that personalization, across all of these, right? And that's why I was saying earlier, I hope people from a whole bunch of different job titles are here, because being able to segment stores, just if you think about, let's go drive-through versus non-drive-through. Or if you think about, here are my stores that are 5,000 square feet and here are my stores that are 20,000 square feet, right? Like, should I put up a pop-up store or should I put up a flagship? Like, a lot of these things help your real estate decisions in terms of strategy and ops and finance, and especially merchandising. We'll go through some examples of how it leads there. And then obviously, once you've created that sort of audience segmentation, now you use marketing to get that message out, okay? So that's the theory. That's the premise. That's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. I am going to be showing examples of where Placer's thinking about this, right? I mean, this is Discover, so we can think about, sort of roadmap and what our vision is. But first, I wanted to show a couple examples of out in the real world of where we're already seeing some of these things, okay? So 3 quick examples. The first, Macy's, department stores, right? Maybe not the most sexy things, but department stores making a comeback. Malls, if anybody's still going shopping out there, I know I've got kids, malls are still packed. But Macy's, they got a new CEO, right? Tony Spring came in end of February into March, and what did he do? His first thing is we are going to look at and remake Macy's. And so there were some stores, the first 50 that he chose, right? So he has not gone public on how they chose the first 50, but he has, gone out and sort of chosen however he did. And then the other thing that he did is he closed a bunch of stores, right? And so instantly you have these store segments around on the real estate side where you have the first 50, and then he's certainly monitoring and tracking that, because what does he report when he does earnings? The first 50, same year, store over store sales increase, right? So that's his proof point on how it worked. And so how did he get that 3.5% increase, same store sales at department stores, right? People aren't thinking that Macy's is growing, but yet he's showing growth here. It's a couple things, right? Number one, remodel, right? Another real estate decision, but you have to choose which ones to do. How do you remodel? Make them really modern and sleek. I think there's a lot of color orientation that he put in. And so how do you match that sort of new layout to the community? That was a big part of the remodels. And then the other thing that he did is he brought in a lot of experiential marketing, right? Brought in a lot of different influencers. And so again, matching the right influencer to that local community. So being able to understand his stores, segment them into what levers he could pull and Macy's can pull to increase these sales, that's an example of being able to do store segmentation across all three, and then you've got great results, right? Second example, TJX, right? So I'm really more thinking about TJ Maxx here, but TJ Maxx, these folks, their merchandising and their buyers, they make localized segmentation decisions every single day, right? You get inventory, and then they're not in the business of buying inventory and shipping it across the entire United States, right? That's not their efficiency. So they have to understand, this is what's available in this market. Should I buy it for this market and put it in, right? So deep segmentation across all their stores helps their buyers understand what inventory they can buy and look at the results. Again, those same store sales, right? What are we doing to make our stores, to drive our existing stores, drive the revenue up? That's what they're, again, touting on their earnings in June 2024. I'm sure it's still high. I haven't checked recently. But, all-time 5-year high, right? So another example there. My last example, Starbucks, right? Brian Nichols came in, new CEO. He came out with, some things that Starbucks can improve on, right? He certainly had a vision on what he was going to do to sort of, get the company on a trajectory, that basically Wall Street and the investors wanted to see with sales. And he's done a lot of interviews, and 6 of those 7 things that he's talked about have been about the in-store experience, right? I've heard him say that, maybe we over-indexed on convenience, right? Maybe we over-indexed on the stores that have drive-through. Maybe we over-indexed on the mobile app, because what was the consequence of that? The consequence by having all this drive-through is you have your baristas making all of this stuff, with the drive-through and to go, and people were waiting in line for 20 minutes. And he's like, that's not the experience we want, right? That's a horrible experience. And so how do we make this consumer experience better? How do we get back to this vision of being a third place where people come and enjoy Starbucks and spend more time there, right? So being able to look at his different stores by dwell time, being able to look at stores of which ones have drive-throughs versus which ones don't, and even being able to look at square footage are all some of the things that we're talking to them about some of this store segmentation, right? CEO of Starbucks doing something as simple as, right, he's making a statement that we're going to get all of our in-house, the people that order in line, 4 to 7 minutes. And so how are we going to do that? We're going to move the cinnamon shakers and the matcha shakers out from behind the baristas and put that out where people can sort of do that on their own. Therefore, the baristas don't have to do it again. So, CEO of a company talking about those types of things, all about, though, the store experience and winning back those customers, okay? So I think, how does that relate to sort of the segmentation across the different ones? Real estate decisions, drive-through versus not. That's how they think a lot about the world. They're full service versus not. And then obviously a lot on the operations and strategy there, okay? All right, so first QR, opportunity. Which of those 3 examples resonated with you the most? I don't have a live view of this, but we've got help, and then we'll get the results. But that's the first poll question. All right. I wasn't sure if people would be like, I'm not answering that. So it worked. All right. So let's move on to more of the Placer emphasis here. Let's move on to, how is Placer, it's easy to sort of talk about this stuff, but, what is Placer actually doing in order to make this a reality? And I think there's two ways that I think about it. One is, how can we help create the segments and manage them, right? There's no point in creating a segment and be like, oh, great, there's a segment. Let's make sure that this segment is meaningful and that I can actually get ROI out of it, right? So there's the management of it, the performance management. But then there's also the thing of creating a segment and how do you make it actionable, right? And I think those are the 2 things that I want to talk about. So first, we'll talk about just the breadth of how we're thinking about store segments, right? And you have to come back to that statement earlier about is store segmentation the new audience segments? Because you can do things, you can glean from urbanicity, right? My urban stores versus my suburban stores. Maybe the we're just all heard, Allison from Facebook talk about urban stores. Maybe I need a much better pick up and go experience because that's the urban experience, right? Maybe your urban stores are, a little bit more young and single versus, the suburbs you might get more families. So just being able to think about even fashion, maybe in forward-leaning fashion in urban, and then move it out, sort of down that line is how you can think about merchandising, right? So just being able to do this, and even if you already do this at your stores, having the ability to do this across all your competitive sets, so you're evaluating how you are doing urban versus other people doing urban, like 7 Brew, right? Maybe if you're in the crowd, you're thinking about, how am I doing in urban versus Starbucks urban, right? So just being able to get that apples and apples comparison. Weather, the one that I sort of like to think about weather is back to school. Back to school to me and now is really drawn out. I see some back to school start early August, and then you have some back to school that's all the way, in mid-September. But if you're in a market where back to school is mid-September and you're talking about back to school in August, people are like, hey, I just got out of school 3 weeks ago. Don't make me think about back to school yet, right? And so, how can you just start segmenting and understanding that local community so that you can service them correctly and show up at the right moments? Store type, we talked to, I think it's a lot of retailers, in-mall outlet versus standalone, but even Starbucks talking about my drive-through versus my non-drive-throughs. What Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell, they're the opposite of Starbucks, right? They are trying to get the convenience, right? They understand their experience is the food, not necessarily dining. So what are they looking for? Double drive-through, right? So how are my double drive-throughs doing versus my singles, right? So store type. Store age, I think that's a little bit more around remodeling, right? Remodeling is you might think of it as a sunk cost, but I challenge us, we shouldn't think of it as a sunk cost, right? If we can start looking at, here is the store potential, right? We build in some visit forecasting around that remodel, then you're starting to go, well, this is actually my ROI on it, and then it becomes, do I remodel or do I relocate, right? If I relocate, what's the cannibalization? How many of my existing customers are going to still stay with me in my new place, right? So just being able to understand, like when a store was last remodeled is where I've been having a lot of conversations around that one. I won't go through all of these, but I think competitive density, that's probably one that's probably pretty good that Placer can be unique at, right? Like, in my trade area, how many competitors do I do? And so, my competitive trade areas versus my medium versus less, how are those doing? As I start doing site selection, as I start doing white space analysis, I want to probably make sure I have a good diversification of my portfolio, right? I probably want to start, balancing my real estate things around some of these groups, right? Trade area penetration, performance, crime level, it's nobody likes putting their goods and their goods behind lock and key, but theft prevention and loss, they make 10Ks and 10Qs, right? It's a real thing, and so how can you start doing some of that stuff proactively versus reactively, right? And then I think the last one, just to put up there, custom, right? So one of the big things that Placer is going to be investing in is the ability to upload, first-party data, not individual not individual data, but maybe more SKU level data. Here's all the stores where bootcut jeans are performing, and then here are the stores that are baggy jeans, like apparel, right? T-shirts and jeans are where they make the money, but what do you put on it? Do you have like an R&B more theme song or store or a country, right? Those are the things that really are going to drive your revenue. So anything that you can use for us, but then also, if you have groups of stores, if people know the Placer platform, you can use custom chains, custom tags, and then that will be able to put out throughout, okay? So those are some of the examples of store segments of how we're thinking about it, that you can manage your business. But then once you've done it, what does it look like? Like, what's the return, right? And so what we're looking at here is the ability to, so what we're looking at here is, imagine that you double clicked onto like the competitive status one, right? And so for any of those, these are the type of information, right? So number one, I think just being able to put your numbers up on a map as well as, display that breakout. Like I talked a little bit about risk diversification, but like Miami, right? Some of your stores in Miami are going to be very tourist heavy, and you got to have a lot of accessories, and then you've got also stores that are not in the tourist area, and you got to have a different flavor there, right? And so just being able to see that store segments aren't necessarily just regional areas. The store segments are really based on your trade areas and who are those and what that local community is for those stores, right? That's how audiences work. That's how store segmentation works. Then this is where I was talking about, the performance and the monitoring down there at the bottom, right? So you have all of these different store segments, and then how are they performing, right? So segment A in here, high competition, this is how many visits I get on average. This is my dwell time on average. This is my trade area penetration, and you've got all those things. If you're running this quarterly, maybe you're looking at, hey, this is what I'm going to be focusing on over the next years. I'm going to really be focusing on my medium ones, and you're going to be able to track your performance across that cohort of stores, right? So just if you're going to build a strategy around these things, you also need to be able to track the performance. Time of day, one of the things that I've been hearing about, like convenience store recently, is that 7 o'clock, that's maybe 6 to 9 o'clock crowd that goes to convenience store, different than that noon crowd, different than that after school crowd, different than that late night crowd, right? So just being able to even look at your stores, but also segment them by time as well, understanding, different ones. I think return to office, like for the real estate folks, right? That's a big one. What is that impact of return to office? How far are people, what percentage of people are coming from work versus home, things like that. Okay, so that's more on the performance metrics. This is where I think things get a little bit more actionable. This is where Placer brings in some of our AI and machine learning, is that, on the top up there, there's lots of different data sets that Placer has, right? We've got, census data, we have STI data, we have spatial, which is, more of a social segmentation, we have AGS, we've got a whole bunch of different data sets. And across any of those data sets, we could actually use machine learning to discover the distinguishing features, right? We're not just gonna, if you look in our tool today, we kind of give you the list of everything and we give you the index, but this is what a lot of people are asking for is, tell me what's most important about it, right? So we're actually drawing out what are the most important things, right? So, using STI spending patterns, you can do this across, what's my discretionary income around entertainment or any of these types of things. I think the follow graph thing with one of our partners, Placer.ai, is really cool, right? You can start looking at, for these segment of stores, what are the influencers that are resonating the most, or what are the brands that this group of people are following the most, and I think that can really be insightful into how you're going to approach, that local community. And then obviously we've got, demographics, employment, and things like that, and then, the top psychographics there as well. Okay, so those are, as I rattled off earlier, different ways of having audience segments around loyalty and lifetime value and all these. Here are other ways of how you can look at your stores and how you can use that information to target your audiences, and so now you have store audiences essentially, right? Okay. All right, so that's it. Pretty quick, painless. One more thing before you get out your phones is, technologists. Obviously, we need this data available as a feed as well, right? Obviously, because you can't just always be in the platform. So just know that we're planning on building a feed as well, right? You got your stores, and so by that you can join to your own data sets, right? You folks have lots of information about your stores, and so being able to get at the store level, and then all of these attributes around them. Okay. All right. So last QR code question. So I'll let you go over there, but if you had a magic wand, what would be the store segments that you would wish could instantly appear in Placer? So we have got back to school, we've got weather, urbanicity, bringing your own first-party data, so your own segments up there, and being able to look at that, or other. So, okay. While we are tallying the votes, I think just the last thing that I want to do is I want to bring this together back to the ROI, right? I think that, one of the things that we need to emphasize and Placer needs to do a better job of is making sure that when you're getting the insights, how are you tying it back to the ROI that you got? So just some examples. We've kind of gone over a lot of those across real estate, the different jobs and the different departments that are out there, and then those dollar signs kind of like represent what the impact of your ROI can be. So, Elizabeth, I don't know. And do you have the results, or should we go questions first?
We are tabulating I have the first one. We're getting the second one in live time, but the example that resonated most with people, 75% said Starbucks.
Wow.
Yeah,
right.
23% Macy's, and 3%, although a great 3% said TJX.
All right. Well, good. I mean, I guess the Starbucks and the Macy's ones were a little bit more advanced, but maybe people did want to get their coffee faster at Starbucks. I don't know.
Oh, and breaking update, we have the second results back. Can you pull that back up just so I can see which ones, and I can tell you the percents? Okay, so number one spot was my own first-party data. Unsurprising, 35% of you. Second, and with 21% weather. 27% for urbanicity, and 11% for back to school. And then we had a nice 5% for other.
Okay. I mean, I think I was I don't know if afraid was the right word, but I was wondering if it was going to be other, which would have meant that none of the things I said resonated. So I'm glad that's not the answer there. But I think urbanicity, just something as simple as that. The more and more people I talk to, it's just, it's not everybody has that. It's hard to get that across every other retailer. Mm-hmm. So, okay.
Any questions for Kevin? Yes, I will run the mic back.
Hi. Is Placer thinking about how to merge like e-commerce behavior to physical behavior? So understand, like maybe segment an e-commerce population and then understanding where they're going and what they're doing in the physical world.
Yeah, if we're talking about 2025, and we're thinking about roadmaps and beyond, I think there's a couple different things that we want to do. So number one, we do want to bring in more third-party data. It's like even search intent data, bring them in the platform. And then the other thing that I'm starting to see is that if you look at sales and then you look at sales at a store, maybe like let's look at stores for a city, look at sales at either a store level or maybe a city or a DMA. If you're able to say total sales was X, but sales from stores was Y, you can now sort of start to suss out what is that e-commerce contribution. And so being able to understand what areas, maybe we can get the store level, but certainly what areas have a bigger concentration of e-commerce versus not. I think that's at least the thoughts that I've been having. I don't know, would you be willing to share, what you'd want to see?
I guess, like you segment an e-commerce population, but then just understanding what they're doing separate from that. Like, are they, is this population going to certain type of stores, or just understanding what their physical behaviors are, who they are as people, based off just their e-commerce.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I like it. I like it. I don't know if we have that specific, but like I said, being able to get that discrepancy. I know we have a partner that's added sales to it. Again, I don't know if they've separated just the e-commerce, but they're adding their segmentation to it. So, but thank you for the question.
Any other questions? Yes. Okay. I feel like I'm the Placer Vanna White today.
Thank you. So since 35% of us are interested in first-party data today, is there something that we can have in Placer right now that allows us to upload any of that first-party data?
Yeah, I mean, Placer has the ability to create custom tags and custom chains, right? So if you've already done the segmentation and then just want to see results by the segmentation that you've created, you can upload your own custom tag and get it that way, right? So, some of the first-party data might be SKU level data where we use machine learning to create the segments, or if you already have it, you can create those custom tags and chains, and a lot of the information that I just talked about would be available for you today. Okay. Did you have a question? No? Chris?
I think that's it. Well, let's have a big round of applause for Kevin. Fantastic presentation.